Hi, everyone. This is Bill Coffin with another episode of the Ethicast, coming to you live from the 14th Annual Global Ethics Summit in Atlanta, Georgia. Hi, everyone. It's day 3 of the Global Ethics Summit here in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm Bill Coffin, and joining us today on this episode of the Ethicast is Alex Vanderwalk, partner with Morrison Forster. Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Indeed. Now, today we're going to be talking about ethical AI, which is a subject I am fascinated by. So let's get right into it. In 2023, what are some of the most common ethical AI dilemmas that you've encountered in practice? And the big question is, do any of these dilemmas surprise you?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill, and thanks so much for asking it. In terms of ethical dilemmas, I'd say there are 3, and they boil down to bias that would be implemented or inherent into any AI tool. It's explainability and transparency. And let me cut right to the last part of your question, which is, do they surprise me? No. We have to acknowledge that AI is a model. And as with any model, it depends on how it has been trained and how well it has been trained, and more importantly, what it has been trained on. And so if you acknowledge that most of the AI that we have now and that we've had for the last couple of years has been trained with data that was generated, a decade, 2 decades ago, there is inherent bias in the underlying data. So the importance is that we acknowledge that we have to be able to explain how we got to what the model does now, and that we're transparent about that.
Indeed. So can you share some tips on how general counsels, chief legal officers, CEOs, et cetera, can take ethical AI and turn that into a business differentiator for themselves?
Absolutely. I'd say it's 2 things. The first is don't prohibit, but empower. Acknowledge that a lot of these generative AI tools are free, they're out there, and people want to use them. So the moment you prohibit them to be used, it's more likely that people will find ways to actually circumvent those prohibitions and still use them. The other one is the tone at the top. And what I mean with that is that we've seen that a lot of companies have ethical principles, which is fantastic, right? It is a codification of what the company stands for and what everyone finds important in terms of ethics. But what I've also seen is that sometimes the ethical principles can get in the way of business objectives or profitability. And that's where it's really important that the tone at the top is these principles are as important as legal compliance. We want to adhere to these. This is what we stand for as a company so that everyone is on the same page of what it is that we're doing here.
Yeah. So based on your practice, are you seeing new trends on the digital ethics front? For example, do you think that digital ethics will eventually find its way into the conversation that companies are having with investors and regulators around things like ESG metrics?
Absolutely. I think the most important thing to acknowledge here is that ethics is not always the same as law, and it doesn't always align with law, right? Ethical principles are what we feel as a society is important. And the bottom line of that is that mere compliance with legal obligations won't always address the ethical issues. It won't always save you from, public outcry or response or front page paper news. So the whole issue here, I think, is to acknowledge that it is important to have these ethical principles, and we definitely expect these to be, front of mind and topics for conversations in ESG investors and regulators alike.
Yeah. So looking ahead, what are some of the ethical rules that companies should be aware of in the coming years, especially as they refer to the topics we've already been discussing in this episode?
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to acknowledge that some of these rules are already embedded in laws, and this is not to counter or negate my previous comment, but certainly when you look at some of the privacy laws around the world, GDPR in Europe and other laws, in the U.S., in Brazil, other parts of the world, many of the underlying fundamental ethical principles are embedded there. Principles around fairness, around explainability, around transparency. So they're there. At the same time, we see a lot of specific regulation come out or being prepared specifically on the topic of AI, such as in Europe, the AI Act, and we see similar initiatives, again, around the world. And they may introduce further or new obligations and requirements beyond these principles that we already have now. I will emphasize, this is a field in development. If you look at the generative AI discussion that I think everyone has been having, We haven't been having that until early this year. It's very recent, and lots of these tools have had such immense growth. I read the other day they grow faster than in terms of amounts of users than TikTok did. So that's telling in and of itself. We're in the midst of this. Actually, I would say we're at the outset of this. So it's in development, and as long as we keep a pulse and make sure that we acknowledge that this is something that is new on the one hand, but not entirely new on the other hand. We've had AI around for a long time, and companies have had processes in place to deal with that. I think this is something that we, most of us will be well prepared for.
Indeed. It's impossible to not notice just how swiftly evolving this field really is, and how a lot of the conversation has been superficial, or perhaps not with the deep knowledge on it. So very much appreciate the depth and clarity of your insight on this, and the actionable angle you've taken on this. So it's been really fantastic talking with you about this, and thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Bill, for having me, and I wish you all a great remaining of your conference.
Thank you so very much, Alex. Great to have you. This has been another episode of the Ethicast. I'm Bill Coffin. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.